All right, so now I want to switch gears and just kind of talk about some aspects happening at the time. The rise of cultural nationalism in education. So, um, this is the other side of this is when you have revolutions and you change things, or actually even before having a revolution, um, you know, colonists came from Europe, from established states. Colonists come to the to the American continent, right? Not the United States, early on. Um, and they build their own worlds of how they're going to. They're going to do things that we take for granted now, and it's not going to be consistent. For example, you get your garbage taken out, right? You have a garbage truck service. We have running water. We have a water department, electricity, and or we have public schools, which you're required to pay taxes to, and you are required by law to send your children to. All these kind of things that we take for granted that are not necessarily set up for a long time in a consistent way. And so, the concept of having an educated citizenry was something that needed to be enacted in reality. You're going to basically see many of the rural areas, and even in the urban centers, the education you get is what you get at home or from your church, or you're not going to have much of one at all, except other than the education of how to do the work that you need to do. Okay. So there became this idea that all free men should get a free education, that's something that should be a part of being a citizen. Okay. Basically, though, as late as 1815, there was no state enacted means for that. Okay. And then there's also the debate about what to do with Native Americans. The racism against Native Americans was seen in a different way than the racism against blacks in this country. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more later with Thomas Jefferson's view of Native Americans and the idea of the noble savage that we see that comes out of a European Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau, that the Native Americans were seen as people who were kind of locked into an earlier stage of human development that they didn't get out of, and that by getting them to settle down, not to be nomadic, to give them a proper education in basically Western civilization and the religion of Christianity, they then could actually be a part of America. Now, this is what many people thought, even Thomas Jefferson. But of course, there's a contradiction there as well, because at the time, there was still a lot of land to the west that could be conquered. And if you're going to befriend those native peoples, then how are you going to be able to take their land simultaneously? So there was the greed, we could use the word, the ambition, if you don't like the word greed. There was a desire for the land out west and to expand, and the Native Americans were the obvious obstacle to doing that. And so you're going to have that one kind of trend, that idea of integrating them in, and the other set of interests, which was just to do whatever you needed to do with them to get what you needed to get. Okay, and some people kind of fused those two interests together. We'll talk more about that later. So, the concept of universities. Initially, there was only 9 at the start of the War of Independence in the United States, with the not so United States at the time. There was 22 by the year 1800. And at the time, clergy were the only professionals with college training as a prerequisite. So they were rooted in theology. Okay? And That's interesting, isn't it? So the religiousness of America. I just want to kind of point out that I do think it's debatable when people talk about this kind of utopian time where in America, the founding fathers and the people were all devout Christians, and then we got corrupted by liberal relativists later on. I think that that's an unfair and actually incorrect vision of how the world worked then and up to now. But having said that, we Americans have always been known as being a little extra religious, by the way, and even now it's been pointed out. Just to say, um, for many religious conservatives, America has lost its way, but American conservatives have always thought America lost its way. Actually, every conservative in every country thinks the country's lost its way for the most part, because you're really rooting into something. And by the way, I think we can back this up in a long debate historically, but I'd have to pull out documentation. But I mean, what I'm saying is, when you're working towards perfection, nothing's ever good enough, right? When you have a vision of with resolve, you really believe you have an ideology that is just ironclad, and it's that you go that route, then nothing looks right. You're always going to see people coming out drunk from whiskey drinking on a Saturday and come in with a hangover on church on Sunday and shake your head and go, oh gosh, this person's not, God have mercy on their souls, right? Okay. And, we have in America that despite all of that, even despite now the maybe lack of church attendance, we have a much more, Americans show much more belief as a general rule in God and in religion than, let's say, Europe does now. Okay, that's just been a topic for a long time. Anyways, so we move on to University of Pennsylvania was created first American medical school. So there's the beginnings of that. Cultural nationalism. Noah Webster, Webster, you heard of him? Webster wrote that as soon as a child opens his lips, he should rehearse the history of his own country. He should lisp the praise of liberty and of those illustrious heroes and statesmen who have wrought a revolution in her favor. He reformed spelling in America, and his American spelling book sold over 100 million copies. Something that we have to think about. For a long time, and what's hard, you may notice if you go back and you look at English literature, which spans several hundred years, spellings of certain words are not consistent. And there wasn't always a rule for that. And you'll see in people's handwritings, just like now, words being spelled differently, not consistent. A spelling book was a way of kind of creating unity. Think about the political concept of a spelling book. If I write through, he went through the door, and I spell THREW like you throw something, you still understand what I mean. And even though I didn't spell the word correctly or use the wrong spelling, now I'm trying to actually think if I actually did the right spelling. Isn't that funny? That's what I'm saying. We have like through, and we have, like American spelling is actually very difficult. And with the texting generation, it makes me laugh. I'm finding that I'm getting to be worse and worse at spelling because we got spell check correctors, everything. And then we're kind of coming into a new era of actually just disaster spelling, I think, while the computers do that for us, which is a whole other interesting topic. But the idea is to create unity. We know there's a source to tell us how it is supposed to be written and spelled, okay? Consistently. It's important. So just thought I'd throw that. Then we started having our own kind of literary culture. Washington Irving is one that kind of popularized a lot of stories, the kind of folk stories that come out of the United States. Rip Van Winkle, the Headless Horseman, and and so forth. So I just kind of wanted to point out, some of those more cultural stories. I think now we're seeing more and more that a lot of that early American culture that I even learned in school is becoming less and less taught now. As we're going into the 21st century, what Americans are focusing on remembering about our past is changing, and it'll always do that, by the way. It'll always do that. Just thought I'd point that out. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to go next to that religious topic again, the Second Great Awakening. Okay,